welcome back to my Lipedema channel. I had my first sort of introductory video, and as I look back on that, I realized, wow, I didn't give a lot of detail about lipedema at all. And so I wanted to take some time to talk not just about like kind of what the condition is, what the disease is, but also to talk about how specifically it manifests in my life, how I discovered that I had it, who I went to for diagnosis, and what I've learned along the way. And so for people who aren't familiar with the sort of like insurance context around it, I think it's important to kind of start with that understanding, and then I'll go back a little bit. It has been only as the result of litigation that the majority of insurance carriers will actually cover lipedema. And by covering lipedema, that means to cover the surgeries that are the only known method of preventing the disease from progressing, right? And so that means that the procedure that's required is a liposuction procedure, which typically falls into that category of cosmetic surgery, which your insurance isn't going to cover. And so it's really been the result of untiring efforts from a lot of people that I'm so thankful. Like, I'm thankful to all of the people who have invested their time and efforts to make this possible for people like me to be able to have such, to have better access. I won't say easy access, but to have better access, because there was a time when you just couldn't get the approvals. So what's happened now is like the pendulum has sort of swung the other direction. We see that it's not as hard to get insurance companies to cover this, right? Whether they want to or not. There are definitely special considerations when getting this coverage, including pre-approvals, including having to do single case agreements, including having to find a doctor willing to accept the insurance, and if there is one who is able to, like 99% of the time, they're not going to be a network, which is just another thing that we have to deal with. So within that context, what's happened is there are quite a lot of people who see a money-making opportunity related to this. And I know that sounds crazy. Like, it was really hard for me to kind of wrap my mind around it. But if you have lipedema and you are looking for information about what the best practices are when it comes to, finding a surgeon, what we should be looking for as far as, a surgeon's experience in this area, what we should have as our sort of hard stops about, we won't even consider someone who's not a licensed, who's not a, board certified plastic surgeon. There's so much misinformation out there that it's almost, it's very, it's paralyzing almost, right? So it's incapacitating. When I look at everything, all the information that's out there, you'll have some people saying you have to go with a board certified plastic surgeon. Some people will say it absolutely doesn't make any difference. What matters is that you are dealing with someone who is familiar with lipedema. Other people will tell you that there are 100% very specific ways that this should be tackled, and very specific kinds of liposuction that need to be done. Other people will say, actually, it doesn't matter how you do the liposuction. It only matters that the surgeon has experience doing it. And then you'll hear some people say you have to do water assisted. Others will say, no, you have to do power assisted. And it's so hard to unpack it all. And then once you finally think you understand what you want, you finally think you have like the litmus test that you can, go to a doctor and kind of discuss with them to understand whether or not they're the right surgeon for you. Then you start to realize that all of the surgeons who are the ones that you would have like first on your list, they are the ones that are so ridiculously expensive or will want you to pay up front and then be reimbursed by your insurance. There's just a lot to consider there. There's a lot to navigate. So it is much harder to get care if you are a person who's discerning than you would think. Because even when I know where the people are that I think are going to be the best people, it's not always clear that I can either afford them, that they'll take insurance, that they actually have the experience that they say they have. Because what I've seen as a rising practice is that you'll go into different Facebook groups where you are looking for people who have that shared experience and who are seeking the same kinds of things, who are going to share their stories after having surgery. And there will be other people who are basically plants by different surgeons. And I know this makes me sound like such a conspiracy theorist, but I promise you that is not my gig, not my thing. And it's just something that you realize only because you start seeing people being suspicious of kind of how some people pop up out of nowhere, never share any pictures of themselves, but, you know, praise one particular doctor and malign another doctor. That's always usually the sign, like when they're really tearing down somebody else, then you're like, okay, well, why are you so desperately upset about, you know, XYZ person, right? So that's something just to keep in mind as something that's been a real challenge for me. I am pre-surgery. I am someone who has been doing conservative treatment for a long time now. It's probably been, I was diagnosed like a year and a half ago, maybe even 2 years ago, although it was a loose diagnosis from like a vascular clinic that I really didn't feel like was definitive in my mind. I felt pretty certain after having seen, you know, pictures that I was like, this has got to be what I have. But I was hoping for something that was like a slam dunk. And honestly, when I went to the vascular clinic, they really weren't familiar with it at all. They were kind of like listening to me. So I was like, gosh, this is just, why is there not more information known about this? So a lot of that kind of, it's very early stages in understanding this disease and understanding the population impacted by this disease and understanding sort of what the level of care, the standard of care should be beyond the fact that it's to remove the lipedema fat that's causing the inflammation, the pain, the bruising, to help prevent the progression of the disease and restore mobility, right? That's the goal. So let's take a step back. So when I was in the military, I think it was the first time that I recognized, because I grew up as an only kid, and so I didn't play with a lot of other kids. There was like one other person on my block that was my age. I was in an older neighborhood. There were a lot of old people, like elderly people in my neighborhood on 13th Street in Northwest DC, way before the gentrification happened, right? So there was like me and Kathy, and she's my next door neighbor. And I never wore, if I wore shorts, I don't remember them, right? I remember knowing that I was chunky pretty early in the game. But I don't remember thinking that I was unusual. I had definitely heard people talk about the size of my legs or, you know, referring to my puddin'. But I don't know that it was anything that I thought was super unusual, right? And then when I was getting ready to join the military, so I had my son pretty young, and that I was married at 18 and literally had my son, gosh, like maybe a month before my 19th birthday. So I was a super young mom. But I recognize now that giving birth to my son was probably like one of those kinds of hormonal events that is triggering for this disease that kind of will set the conditions for an escalation in the disease. So I had my son and lost a ton of weight after having him. Started running, I started working out, was 100% certain that I was going to join the military, and so wanted to be in the best shape possible for that. I got down to the smallest I've ever been in my adult female life. Did I say female? That was weird. I've always been a female. But in my adult life, the smallest I've ever been is about 145 pounds. And I was probably there for like a day, right? Like a day where I like saw the scale hit 145 and I was like, Shazam. When I look back on those pictures, and I'll try and find one, I did not necessarily look super healthy at that weight. I definitely looked a little haggard, but I only had this one picture and I was pretty angry in the picture. I'm not sure. It was like me scowling from the front porch of that same 13th Street house. And I don't have any other pictures. And basically I can't prove that I existed before the military because I hated taking pictures of myself so much, mostly because I was just large. And so I didn't want to kind of capture any of that. And if I did take a picture, it was just my face. And even then, I kind of felt like I had a goofy smile and weird teeth. So I didn't even like that. Like I would smile in like a really awkward way. That it's like painful for me when I look back at these pictures. So now, whatever the faces I have, it's the one I use. I smile, and I try harder to document my life. This is part of that, right? But it's not easy for me. So again, can't really prove that I existed before the military, and then it's only because the military forced me to be in some of these pictures, like whether they were, for your promotion photos or just to have a photo on file. I guess something terrible happens to you, they can identify you, right? So I joined the military. I am like feeling my best, 145, go to basic training, gain 20 pounds in basic training, not even joking. My son is at this point, he's about 2 years old now. Yeah, about 2 years old. And I am blowing up. And I'm telling myself that it's like, oh, this is definitely like muscle, right? Like I'm in the Army, I have gained muscle. But it kind of looks a little different than that. And of course, in the military, you have a regimented uniform that you've got to wear. There's one that you wear when you're doing like utility stuff, like just good old fashioned Army stuff. And so for me, those were BDUs back in the day. And then eventually they transitioned to ACUs. And that was when I got out, I was still at the tail end of ACUs being still legit to wear before they transitioned to the next set. So that was your like daytime uniform, like just going out doing Army stuff uniform. But when you were doing physical training, you were wearing your PTs. And I started off with the funky gray PTs that were like made of cotton and just immediately turned into like a 40-pound weight around your neck if it rained. And then we transitioned into the black and gray PTs. And I was just on the cusp of having to get the ones that were like banana colored, like they were red and yellow, black and yellow, but I got out just before then. So the joke was, if you stay in long enough to see like 2 changes in a uniform, more than 2 changes, like that's how you know it's time to go, right? So I would see everyone else wearing their physical training uniform, which was in the summertime, a t-shirt and shorts. And you could wear underneath those shorts like spandex shorts that would stop like right above your knee. And of course, this is by regulation. They had to stop above your knee. Like it was very specific what you could wear. So for me, that was a little bit of a nightmare. Without the spandex, my thighs were, I used to joke like, you're gonna smell bacon when I run because my thighs were rubbing. And with the spandex, it looked like I was busting out of a can of biscuits, like you would, the bottom of the short, like of the spandex short would stop, and then there would be like this big bubble, and then my knee, and then like a tree trunk of the rest of my leg. So it wasn't cool. Like I hated me some shorts, and I milked those spandex. Like I got them as low as I possibly could without getting in trouble. But one of the things that I noticed was how much other people's legs didn't look like mine. And it was particularly, I think like the time where I was like, something is really different. I always bruised super easily. I used to joke like, oh, I bruised like a grape, it's just a thing. But when I had to do SERE, and if you're interested in me talking a little bit more about the military stuff, like please, like just drop a note in the comments. SERE was like the funniest like horror show ever. But during SERE, before we even got to the capture part, right? Like we were just doing the train up for it. We were out in the field, like doing our thing. I was one of the squad leader for my team. And by the way, I've been told I have like a complete resting diva face, right? So it was really funny. You're with a whole group of people. You don't know them. They're coming from all over, different bases. And some people confided in me afterward that they were 100% sure that I was like the worst when they first met me. And then like we went out into the field together and had like a really good time, like especially for like conditions that were as crappy as the ones we were in. Like it was definitely a bonding experience. But anyway, I digress. So while we were there, like we go out and do just like this regular stuff where we're going out and, learning things like, this is how you hunt for XYZ. This is how you know what's poisonous. This is how you make a net to go fishing, like all of that kind of stuff, how you make a smokeless fire. I noticed that when I came back, and this is like a lot of like, running through the woods throughout the day, definitely getting like smacked in the face, smacked in the leg, like tripping over logs. I'm not the most graceful person. Again, by the way, didn't realize, but this is also something that's classic lipedema. Not the most graceful person. And we'd come back at the end of the day, and I'm in the barracks room, and people are just like hanging out. And I was in all female room, right? That was still back when they definitely separated sexes. And people looked at me and they're like, oh my God, what happened to you? And I was like, is this not like, I'm looking at everyone else, and I was black and blue from my knee all the way up to the crotch and all the way down the front of my legs. Like it literally looked like someone had beaten me. And I couldn't necessarily like pinpoint any particular thing that had happened other than like, yeah, I tripped a couple of times, right? But I'm looking at everyone else there and no one has this. And it's like the weirdest realization for me where I'm like, why is it just me? But I was also a pilot. I didn't mention that part. So as a pilot, you don't draw attention to things that you're like, oh, this is like a medical thing. Like, that's not something that you want. Like, it's so funny. The entire time I'm in the military, my medical file was like yay big. Basically nothing in there but my fit for duty slips every time I had to go get a flight physical. Like, hey, I'm good. Everything's great. Feel good? Feel great. Everything's awesome. You go. But you notice things like this where you're like, that's super weird. Like, why do I look like I've been beaten and nobody else has anything on them? It was so strange, but you kind of file it under odd, and you just take note of it. And for a while there, I was like, is that like hemophilia? I was like, nope, look that up. That's not what that is. I was like, maybe it's some kind of a disorder that I just, I've never like had an abnormal test for. Like, but at the end of the day, you don't spend your time in the military thinking about like what's wrong, or celebrating pain. Like, I also knew like my legs were really painful. I was not the person who wanted to ever get a massage on my legs because it was like awful. You could like tear my back up. Like, I'll take all the pressure on that. But on my legs, like anything hurt. My best friend to this day hates it that I mentioned this, and I hope she sees this video and she's gonna be like, damn it, Holly, why? But she pinched me on the back of my arm once, and oh my God, it brought tears to my eyes, and she still thinks that I was like, oh, come on. Like, it was a little pinch, but it was like so painful. So that's the kind of like little indicators that you have where you're like, this is weird. And I have a huge number of people that I can compare this to, because I'm in the military. And the other thing was that we would do PT tests where there were some clear indicators that I also had this hypermobility, right? And it's kind of funny, when you're figuring out, you're like, oh, I'm super flexible. I can do all of these things. But we used to do like partner assisted exercises, and people were always a little bit mortified about how when I was sitting, we'd say now crisscross applesauce, right? That my legs just kind of fell down, right? And it didn't matter. Like, you could put pressure on there. Like, we would do these like, they were partner assisted exercises for flexibility, and people would look at mine. You were supposed to like kind of gently press on your partner's legs to like help them achieve an additional level of stretch. And people would look at mine and just feel like, because they would just fall to the ground. But you think it's funny, and we're like, oh yeah, I'm super flexible. It's a great thing. Had never heard of Ehlers Danlos, which, look it up and I'll probably put something on the screen to give you some indicators. But that's definitely what I was diagnosed with like decades later, but never knew that was problematic. Never thought that, was never told by anyone that I shouldn't try to test the limits of that hypermobility. But as I look back now, like I see, like I did have a lot of indicators that there was something a little bit different about me. In addition to the fact that my legs were just huge. I was running as much as everybody else. I did a couple of marathons. I definitely did 10Ks, and we did like the Iron Aviator, like I guess I was like, was it 4 events that we did for that? And I just knew that I was always bigger. And for me, I was like, this is just, I guess it's the cross you bear, right? For me, every run was this horrible challenge, like whether it was my PT test or if it was just keeping up with everyone else, like that was always like my challenging place. I wasn't great at everything else either, but the run was really challenging. And I remember saying like, I just feel like my legs are so heavy. I was like, what do you do like to like combat the heaviness in your legs? And people would look at me like, what are you even talking about? So you learn to not say anything, right? But the reality was I did have this really weird heaviness, and I couldn't understand like why it felt like they were just like logs, and especially like the swelling that would happen in my legs. Like whenever there was heat, like I could feel it in my legs more so, and I would retain more water in my legs, like more fluid in my legs. So just a lot of things that were just really odd. And this is back when I was like, 24, 25 years old. By the time I was a pilot, because I started as a linguist in the military, Korean linguist, so 안녕하세요. But it was really more like 28 by the time I was a pilot. So I'm getting like this slow but steady like data, like this cache of data that says like there's something going on there, but eventually you just give up. Now, fast forward. I had surgery. I had liposuction done for my thighs because they got increasingly bigger and bigger. And this was way back. I don't even know what kind of liposuction they did. I'm going to guess water assisted. It was definitely like some bargain basement person. I have no idea. Like it was in Texas somewhere. And it was just because my inner thighs had gotten so large. Like literally, I remember talking with the surgeon and saying, I don't think you need to do the outside of my thighs because those are smooth, but it's the inside where we have the biggest problem. And it was the only part of me that just would not respond to anything else. And so he did liposuction on my inner thighs, could not get nearly as much as I was hoping for him to get. But to this day, I still have I have fewer problems in that area. So it was the right treatment for a disease I didn't know I had yet. I got it because it just was so hard to fathom what to do. And I was beginning to worry that it was really going to be a challenge for me even staying in the military because, by the way, we would do taping. So you do your PT test, and if you didn't make the weight, which I didn't, they would tape you. And the taping included your neck, your wrist and your forearm, and then also your hips, right? And eventually I think they started bringing in the waist, which was helpful to me because I had a small waist, but my hips were ridiculous and they were lumpy. Like my butt was lumpy. So they were supposed to do a measurement at the buttocks where the buttocks go out the most. And I remember, first Sergeant Cassidy, I'll never forget this guy. Like we're in there, he's measuring me, he's got the tape measure around. He's like, well, I'm not really sure where to measure because you've got this protrusion here, but then you've also got this flat area. And I'm like, it's not bad enough that you're literally like taping my fat, like 3 inches away from my butt. But also like now you've got this commentary running, and he was that guy. Anyway, so that's kind of like I'd kind of gotten to the point where I knew I had to do something because when I was getting taped, like the width of my thighs, like the chunkiness of my thighs was it was making my hip measurement even larger, right? And it was also slowing me down on my run, all of those things. So I got the surgery, didn't necessarily brief it, and hoped for the best, right? Just hope for the best. And I saw maybe a little bit of change, but I know now that it wasn't the high volume that I needed, right? Like he wasn't able to do that. And I don't even know what the limitations were then. It might've been the same 5 liters, but that definitely was not enough. And even though that was all concentrated on just my inner thighs, it's still problematic. And I'll show pictures so you can see kind of where I'm at now, or where I was like when I began this journey about a year ago, and what my thighs look like, even after having done that one liposuction surgery. So fast forward, I am probably 48 years old, and maybe 48 years old, I'd say. And I'm looking online because I'm like, you know what? I should just do this. Like I'm tired of living with a body that doesn't reflect who I am. I'm going to go see if I can actually get someone who knows what they're doing to do my thighs. And so I start looking online for liposuction. And I see, and it was something, Facebook, like sort of ad, but like a Facebook review of Dr. Sue in Tampa. And this girl is saying like, he fixed my thighs were so huge, he fixed them, and she mentions lipedema. And I'm looking at her legs and I'm like, oh my God, those are my legs, right? And I feel like this is like this moment of realization that happens for so many people who have lipedema. Like every time like someone tells their like, and that's when I knew story, there's always something like visually happening, because you just don't actually see people like yourself enough. Or if you do, you don't recognize that they see it as a problem. And one of the interesting things is that lipedema will look different on different people. There are different stages, different types, right? And actually, I've actually learned something about the type. I was listed as stage 3, type 2. And I actually think that as I lost weight, you could start to see that maybe I wasn't actually the same type that he thought I was, because there was just so much, there was so much bulk there before. It was like some of my regular fat was masquerading as lipedema fat, because it's pushing it out. It's never going away. So every time you gain a pound, you're just pushing more out there. So that was when I first realized, like, oh my God, I think I have this. And then I think like everyone else, you go into this rabbit hole where you just look up everything about lipedema that you can find, and it's not a ton. And it's like only a few voices. And you start to wonder like what's going on with that. And then slowly but surely you understand that, oh, there's been this insurance thing. Oh, there's been this like new awakening of like a new realization that this disease is a thing. Oh, it only affects women. So how much research and development is going into it? It's not as much as if it affected, I think, a penis, let's be honest, right? But it's just sort of fascinating. And I talked to my primary care. She doesn't know anything about it. I look online to find out who I should go to get the diagnosis. And I go to this main clinic, and they kind of say, yeah, but they kind of don't really know enough about it, until I finally found the doctor in Delaware. And you can hit me up in the comments if you want me to share that information out, because I can do that with you privately. I can like DM you that. But he put me through like all of these tests, and every last one of them, like check, 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 or tick, 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 like you've got lipedema. And it was so validating, like for the first time, to hear someone say, yes, this is something that's real. You're not just making up the heaviness. You're not just making up this incredible amount of sensitivity that you have to touch. My second ex-husband, yeah, I've had a couple. So my second ex-husband was actually like, he used to see bruising on me and ask me who'd been grabbing me. So it became like this psychological thing too, where if a bruise popped up, I knew I was going to have to sort of explain it. It's okay, like that one's over. But yeah, it's not great. It's not great. So there were a lot of things like that, that this just kind of like took the sting out of, and made like, okay, now that I know what I have, I know what I need to do. And then it just became a matter of gathering the data and making the determination of who's the right person to be my surgeon, because I knew very quickly that I was going to go the surgical route because of all of my experience in the military. I knew this wasn't like, oh, you just need to lose weight. I knew this wasn't like a, like I knew that the liposuction that I'd had before was probably the only reason that I didn't have the same problems that I had on my outer thigh now that I have on my inner thigh. And of course, the lower leg had like my calves, they have absolutely grown exponentially, because that was never touched anywhere else. So that's kind of how I found out that I had lipedema, and how I kind of started to unpack the things that I needed to do to get approved for surgery. And there's a lot of pictures. Again, if it was something wrong with my penis, I don't think they would want pictures of everything like that. But for lipedema, they want to see pictures of all of the things. So I've had to document things for the insurance company. And surprisingly, like my own pre-approval, it took me about 2 weeks to get approved for surgery. And I know that has not been the case for a lot of people, but I think that's the difference, that now post the litigation, right, there's now been, it's so much easier. And there's still some people who are out there trying to convince lipedema sufferers that they need to have help to engage with their insurance, and they're charging these women for that, and not really providing much of a service. At least it's not much of a service if you actually know how easy it is for people to get this. So they're paying money that they may or may not be able to afford to someone who's telling them that they're doing this amazing thing for them, but actually they're literally just like dropping a couple of documents into the insurance people, and in some cases maybe even delaying them because they're trying to encourage an appeal. They have an incentive for an appeal. Anyway, I know there are going to be some people who have comments about that, so I'll shy back away from it. I am just saying what I've seen. I've heard people complain. I personally looked into a service like this and recognized very quickly that this same person was also building a list of doctors that they were saying were the only ones who should be consulted, and having a very sort of acerbic reaction to anyone who didn't want to go with those doctors. And I interviewed two of those doctors. I say interviewed because that's really what one of them described it as. He was like, I don't like it when my patients interview me. And I'm like, you're the guy who's going to be like cutting on my body. So I'm pretty interested in understanding what your philosophy is here. And my experience was that both of those people, both of those plastic surgeons, wonderful though they may be in their fields, had almost no experience with lipedema. And said as much, told me that they had less than a year and less than double digits of lipedema patients. And this is usually high volume liposuction. So it is a little trickier, regardless of what you think is the right methodology, or if you think there's something special to limb sparing liposuction. There are definitely considerations for patients who have this much that needs to be removed. So I was not impressed. And I also saw that there was some sort of circular, I don't want to say kickback because it's not clear to me that it's that, but that there was some interaction there that was not above board. That there was an incentive, let's put it that way. There was an incentive to go with certain doctors, and that it was kind of like a sales funnel almost, which I totally don't like. So if you're interested, I do think that I have found my doctor. And if you're interested in hearing a little bit more about how I made that selection, like please put a comment down below, and I'm happy to do a video about that too. And tell you kind of, it's been crazy. That was a chaotic, let me say, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with where we sort of ended up. But I'm still pre-surgery right now. Okay, having said all of those things, now I'm going to tell you about this disease in the pure clinical terms that have been so helpful to me now, but that I think if I hadn't given you all of that, all of that context, I know it's a lot of context, that it just kind of sounds like that's made up, or is that really a big thing? Let me tell you, it is life-changing disease that the only way I can describe it is to say that it makes your life smaller every year, reduces your mobility every year, reduces your confidence and your joy every year, makes you more susceptible to, I think, if you're a person who is, if you're a people pleaser, if you got a little shred of codependence, if you just like helping people, I think it sets you up to be very vulnerable to someone who sees past the condition, because it is something that in our society in the United States, people are feel very free about commenting on, about making, statements, derogatory statements, like about people who are built the way that I'm built. And it was even painful in the military, people that who knew I could run, I was meeting the same standards that they were, but who felt very confident in saying that I should be making different choices in my life so that my legs didn't look this way. So a lot of gaslighting over many years. That's what this disease sort of does. So now I will let voiceover me kind of take it away and give you a little bit more insight on what lipedema is and what lipedema isn't. And then at the end, let me know if you have any other questions, because I would love to go deeper on any of the areas if you'd like that, and to clarify any areas or to go back to any parts of the story that probably didn't tell in the best order. But that feels like it's therapeutic, right? It's therapeutic to share it. So thanks so much for listening. Please like, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks.
Hey fam, this is VoiceOver Holly, and this is a great time for me to say again that I am definitely not a medical professional. So what I'm sharing here is just my experience, what I've learned from the doctors that I've seen for my own diagnosis and treatment. So definitely your experience may be different, and as I'm about to share with you, there's definitely been a lot of evolving research coming out on lipedema. Now, the graphics that I'm sharing with you, those are borrowed from the web and from the Cleveland Clinic, just to help with the voiceover to give you something to kind of look at that you can reference. So lipedema is a chronic condition that primarily affects women. It's characterized by abnormal fat accumulation, typically in the legs and arms. While not fully understood, it's believed to have genetic and hormonal components. Our knowledge of lipedema is definitely evolving with ongoing research, continually expanding our understanding. Now, the key symptoms include disproportionate fat distribution, and that's distribution of this diseased fat in the lower body or arms, with the upper body often remaining disproportionately slim by comparison to the lower extremities. The affected areas could be tender, bruise easily, and have a nodular texture. The potential complications include mobility issues, chronic pain, joint problems, and psychological distress. Advanced stages can progress to lipolymphedema, which increases the infection risks. Now, there's some disagreement among experts, but lipedema is often classified into types based on the affected area and then into 4 stages, though the classifications aren't universally agreed upon. So those are going to be type 1 through 5, and people can have a combination of those, and then stages 1 through 4, where the skin appearance is going to become gradually more nodular, with larger fat folds, impacted mobility, and pronounced swelling. Now, conservative treatments and surgical treatments are the 2 major routes that people follow in the treatment of lipedema. And so when you talk about conservative treatments, that's focused mainly on managing symptoms and preventing progression. So that can include compression therapy, manual lymphatic drainage, exercise and movement therapy, nutrition and lifestyle modifications, and pain management techniques. Surgical treatments, that's going to primarily involve liposuction techniques that have been adapted for lipedema, and those aim to remove the abnormal fat deposits. And that includes tumescent liposuction, water-assisted liposuction, power-assisted liposuction. And the choice between conservative and surgical approaches, or a combination of both, depends on the individual case, the stage of the disease, and patient preferences. So while lipedema primarily affects women, especially during hormonal changes, rare cases of men have been reported, and research is ongoing to better understand its causes, progression, and treatments. Early diagnosis and proper management are crucial for improved outcomes, and despite challenges with appropriate care and support, many individuals with lipedema can maintain a great quality of life. And there is nothing stopping us from living our best life now, fam. Thanks.